If it doesn't make your heart beat a little faster, it's not your work. And that is the quote of the day. Welcome back to the Quote of the Day show. I'm your host, Sean Croxton of SeanCroxton.com. Thank you so much for tuning into our Tuesday episode. Today's featured speaker is Wes Moore, and this might be my favorite talk of the entire week because Wes is talking about finding your work, finding that thing that you can do that's going to have impact on the lives of so many other people. Here's Wes.
David Graeber's an anthropologist and he's an activist, and he once made a statement where he said, huge swaths of our world are currently working in jobs that they secretly believe should not even exist. The moral pain of that reality is severe. A scar across our collective soul. Where I find myself trying to find my value in my job, what I didn't understand was I needed to find my value in my work. And there is a difference, because a job was my occupation. My work was when my greatest passions began to start overlapping with the world's greatest needs. And I chose to do something about it. I chose to start going through the process of finding my work. And so the work that we do now is very much a reaction to that process. The work we do now is very much a reaction to that journey, because one thing I believe about the work that we do is that the work that we do is not something, that's not a conclusion. Our work is our journey. Our work is the process of understanding why were we here, and how do we then fulfill that lane and fulfill that purpose to making meaningful and worthwhile that we were ever here in the first place. And so I then started going through the process and started studying and understanding, and I started realizing that actually going and finding my work really came down to three different things. Every time I wanted to find my work, I had to go to the ICU. All right, not the intensive care unit. First thing I had to do was identify, then I had to calcify, and then I had to unify. I had to go through my ICU to find my work. First, identify. Identify the fact that your work is not someone else's work. Someone could give you the most impassioned speech about why this thing is really important to them, but if it's not something that makes your heart beat a little bit faster, it's not your work. I'll have people, whether it is, veterans issues, or whether it is reforming the criminal justice system, or whether your issue is education or youth or seniors or the environment, whatever it is, the identification of your work becomes a very personal process. I have people who come up to me and it's like, Wes, listen, I could really use your help. Like, can you help me advocate for the Eastern Bay Owl? I'm like, yo, listen, the Eastern Bay Owl needs help. And much respect for you for believing in the Eastern Bay Owl. I think that's a beautiful thing. It's not my work. I wish you the best of luck. It's just not my work. The identification of that thing that makes your heart beat just a little bit faster, and understanding that your work is a very personal process. It's not about the issue of the day. It's the issue of your life. Calcify. That the goal is not to start something. The goal is to end something. Oftentimes when people come up to me and they're like, listen, Wes, I'm thinking about starting a nonprofit organization. The very first piece of advice I give them is, don't start a nonprofit organization yet. All right? Understand what's out there. Really do your homework and your diligence to figure out what's going on. Here's the truth. There are currently over 40,000 organizations in this country right now that serve veterans. What we call VSOs, Veterans Serving Organizations. Over 40,000 organizations in this country call themselves VSOs. I can tell you right now, as a person who works very actively on these issues, there are not 40,000 issues that veterans face. But we have 40,000 VSOs who are all working to help this cause. My point is this: your goal should never be to start something. Your goal should be to end it. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean founding something. Sometimes it necessarily mean pulling something together. Because the truth is, I know people who bring their work to their job every single day. I think of my man Derek, who's a barber over in West Baltimore, who came up in one of the toughest areas in West Baltimore, who now still has his business in one of the toughest areas in West Baltimore. Now his job is that he's a barber. His work is that he is passionate about education, particularly for young boys, and particularly for young boys of color. So when they come into his barbershop, and it's all known throughout the community, if you come into Mr. Derek's barbershop and you bring a book, you're gonna get a free cut. I think about people like Yolanda, who her job, she's a makeup artist, and she's a beautiful makeup artist, but her work is helping women who are victims of domestic abuse. And what she does is she takes her talents and she takes her gifts, and she will not just physically help, but also morally and spiritually help women who at that time and at that moment might be at the lowest points of their lives, and remind them of just how beautiful and worthy they are when someone else tried to rob that from them. I think about women like Lisa, who works as a corporate attorney, but her work are veterans. And so she goes around her office and goes to all the big corporate lawyers who have suits that they probably hadn't worn in years. And she goes and collects suits, shirts, belts, ties, etc. And then she gives them and works with an organization that are making sure that as veterans are transitioning out and going to look for jobs, that they can come out and look the part when they're going for their job interviews. That this is not about starting something, but it's about ending something. And the third thing, the U, is unify. This idea that the people who you are trying to help, make sure that they are part of the conversation and not just subjects of the conversation. You know, I remember once working with a university who was talking about all the things they're going to do inside the community that they call home. And they're like, we have all these people who are working on our advisory committee, and they started putting all these names, and we have the foremost experts in urban development, Dr. So-and-so and so-and-so. And I said, man, that sounds great. And I said, how many people from the community do you have on your working group? And they kind of looked at each other, and they're like, well, we have Dr. So-and-so to... If you're not making sure that other people are involved in that conversation, particularly the people where your work overlaps and your work aligns, your altruism will be seen as something else. Your altruism will be seen as paternalism. We know that when we go through this process of the identification of our work, it comes with a space and it comes with an urgency. When I was coming up and I was sent off to military school, my mother thought that was a good idea for some reason. It was, Mama. And I remember we had this colonel there, a guy named Colonel Billy G. Murphy, who was a 3-time Vietnam veteran. He was our commandant of cadets, and this dude was as tough as nails. My plebe brothers and I said last, I think we only saw him smile once. And I think it was an accident when we saw him smile. But we loved him because he loved us. But one day he called the entire Corps of Cadets together for an evening formation, which was weird. But it was at 8 o'clock at night on a Sunday night. And we had noticed that he was losing weight really quickly. In fact, the uniform that he was wearing, it was starting to fit so big that it actually started to even look like it was his father's uniform or something. And he called the entire Corps of Cadets together, and we were all sitting inside the pews, and he was standing up in the pulpit. And he got up in the pulpit, and he told us that he was diagnosed with cancer and that he had to leave the school. So this, in essence, was his farewell address. But he said something to us that day that I will never forget. He just looked over us and he said, when it's time for you to leave here, whether it's time for you to leave this school, whether it's time for you to leave your job, whether it's time for you to leave your neighborhood, or when it's time for you to leave this planet, make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here. Make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here, because none of us are promised anything. We're not promised more days or more weeks or more years. No one has ever tapped me in the shoulder and was like, you know what, Wes, you got 6,515 days left, so you can pace yourself. Right? When you see people like, yeah, I'm gonna get to that once I get promoted. I'm gonna get to that once I get tenure. I'm gonna get to that once I retire. I'm gonna get to that once my kids move out. Who has promised you anything? So the only thing that we know is that while we're here, let's actually do something with it. That while we're here, let's love. And let's love a little harder. While we're here, let's push, and let's push a little faster. While we're here, let's give, and let's give a little more. And while we're here, let's get to our work.